Hi there, I'm Rod Bergeron, and thanks for joining me for another quick and easy watercolor painting. I wet the top 1/3 of that page, and I'm going to put in some blue in a a zigzaggy sort of pattern like that. And I'm not going to rinse this brush out. I'm going to pick up some Payne's gray, and I'm going to do the same thing again. Put it in a zigzaggy sort of pattern across there. Okay. Now I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to put it back into the Payne's gray. And I'm going to pick up a little bit more pigment. I'm just going to make it slightly more intense. Okay. And I'm just going to I'm going to tap the brush along the wet edge. I'm just going to put in a little bit of an indication of some trees there. Okay. And you'll see this isn't going to bleed that far because there's not that much water available right there. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back to my yellow ochre here. I shouldn't say back to it. We haven't been to it yet, but I'm going to go to my yellow ochre here. I'm going to put a really thin line of yellow ochre all the way from one side to the other, but I'm not going to touch that wet line. So there's going to be a white line across there. All right. I'm going to pick up a little bit more yellow ochre. I'm going to make this a little bit more jaggedy like that. Okay. Now I'm going to take this brush. I'm going to put it right onto the yellow ochre, right onto the pigment. And I'm going to tap this across here. I'm going to try to build like a tree line of some yellowy sort of foliage there, okay? All right, that's not too bad at all. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of Payne's grays. I'm going to put some wash into that. I'm going to put some water into that wash that we had there. And again, I'm going to try to leave like a little bit of a gray line across there. And I just touched that on the edge, and that's going to bleed across there. That's going to work really well for us. Okay, I'm going to build up some more like that. And you can see I'm keeping my flat brush as a 3/4 inch flat, and I'm keeping it flat. So I'm making thin lines, stroking left to right like that. And wherever that bleeds to, it bleeds to. Don't worry too much about it, okay? All right, so I'm going to rinse that out now, and I'm going to dry it off a little bit on my tissue, and I'm going to pick up some more yellow ochre here, and we're going to come across here like this. All right, now this is going to be another tree line that's slightly closer to us. I'm going to put some more yellow ochre in across there like that, okay? All right, now this next tree line is going to be built out of yellow ochre, but we're also going to add some green into it, okay? So I picked up a whole bunch of yellow ochre right from the palette. It's not really wash, and I'm going to touch it across here, okay? And then we're going to go back to the yellow ochre and pick up a little bit more of it, slightly more intense. Okay, we're just going to keep doing that here for a second or two. And pick up a little bit more yellow ochre, and you can see how that's starting to give us a really great bleed effect going on there. All right, so I'm trying to make this a little bit spring-like, because spring so far has kind of sucked here, to tell you the truth. But I'm going to put some green into that. Just let that, again, bleed off to wherever it is it's going to bleed off to. Okay, we're not going to worry about where it's going to too much. All right, last part of this. You can see that's sort of coming down into here. Don't worry about it. Watercolor does whatever it's going to do, and there's not too much that you can do about that. Okay, I'm going to put a whole bunch of Payne's gray across there. I'm going to take this, which is my #1 watercolor brush, but I've sharpened one end of it with a utility knife. And I'm just going to flick through this, trying to create a little bit of foliage up front here. And I'm going to do the same here with this. All right, that's not looking too bad. Look at what's happening in our sky back there. That's pretty cool. All right, one last thing before we let this dry. I've got a little bag of salt here. You know, I keep it in a bag because, well, because I pinch it like this and then I drop it into the wet areas. You know, and I get asked all the time, you know, what does the salt do? Well, the salt does a couple of things. The first thing that the salt does is it turns into salt water. The second thing that the salt does is it draws in a lot of water. So you'll get these areas where there's these little wee tiny dark spots, and you'll get other areas where there's a white patch. And what's happened is that's where the salt is turned into salt water. Anyways, it gives you some amazing effects that you really don't have to do anything for, and that's one of the reasons why I really like it. All right, let's let this dry. You can see there's also already some very cool things happening where that salt is there. Look at our tree line in the back there. All right, let's let this dry. Don't try to dry this with a hair dryer or anything. You need it to just dry completely natural. All right, let's check this out. Look at what this salt has done here across that area. This is what I was talking about. Like sometimes it attracts the water and sometimes it repels the water. And look at all this crazy little area across here. Look at the salt has done here, created this sort of little bush effects, little tree effects, and then our scribing that we have in there. There's still some of the salt on there. Our sky turned out really, really interesting here by leaving that little bit of a space along there. Look at the blue, and then it turns into this hazy white and down into gray. And look at how far back that tree line looks like back there. And then this little field, then this other field, and then there's almost this green kind of a color across here. There's some green here. That's the Payne's gray and the yellow ochre coming together to give us that green. And then we put our mat on. Yeah, check that out. That turned out really well. I'm really, really happy with the outcome of this one. When you put that mat on here, you can see all the green that came out of there. That's the blue from the Payne's gray and the yellow ochre coming together to give us that kind of a green split in there. Yeah, that's really interesting. I like it. All right. I'd love to know what you think of it. Please let me know in the comment section, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know where you're from. I really appreciate it when everybody leaves me a comment, lets me know where they're from. I find it super interesting to know where people are watching me from. And I appreciate every subscriber I get. So if you're currently a subscriber, thanks a lot. And if you're not currently a subscriber, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks a lot for watching today. And I hope you join me again real soon. Yeah, that Payne's gray turned out really well across there. Now it mixes together with that yellow ochre there. Really nice.